Thank you for your time. My name is Beitula, and this is Shooting from the Hip. Slim, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excellent, thank you. Thanks for showing up again today. Welcome to the show. Before we move on with the subject at hand, which today's subject is cognitive dissonance, bias, confirmation bias, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and emotional maturity, subjectivity, and objectivity. These, again, critical things with regards to being human. Now, having said that, I'd like to express my appreciation for you being here. Please keep in mind what we are doing here on Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and re-examining them. You will find that we are prone to using adult language and expressing opinions. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. This is all just for fun and entertainment anyway. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information in the hopes that you will find it fun and interesting. We encourage you to invest time in searching out these subjects and come to your own conclusions. Now, on with the shit show. So, we were just talking off camera about these very ideas and the relevance of them, right? And the idea has always been to kind of take this information that most people are not aware of and try to make it not just accessible, but for them to be able to relate it then to their experiences and to what they have going on in the course of their own lives that they're living, right? So it's, again, to me, it's this endlessly fascinating subject because we're looking at how we think as human beings, right? And even though on the surface most people just, again, take it for granted, what are you talking about? I think all the time, but it's the idea of how we think, right? And the how of what we think is usually a byproduct of something else. So there's some kind of bias that's some kind of bias that's influencing the way that you think, and you're oblivious to it, right? So that now you have this thing that you're kind of unaware of that's informing your behavior and your judgments and the conclusions you come to. So then the question becomes then, are you really thinking? Because you are clearly thinking, but you're thinking under a filter. You're thinking under a bias that you're, again, oblivious to. So the idea is then, if you were to operate without a bias, what does that produce in you, the individual? So that's what we're going to look at today. So we're going to start, I'm going to start reading from my note package, and we're going to define cognitive dissonance. And it's the discomfort a person feels when their behavior does not align with their values or their beliefs. It's the perception of contradictory information and its mental toll on the individual, right? Because cognitive dissonance is often, it's this thing that when you have a certain life or worldview, and then you're confronted with information that contradicts, is contrary to that then it causes you discomfort because you don't want to accept the contradictory information, no matter how valid or invalid, for that matter, it may be, right? So then it creates this dissonance, right? So if you're familiar with this, have you ever heard of this before?
Yeah.
Okay, so according to the theory, when two actions or ideas are not psychologically consistent with each other, people do everything in their power to change them until they become consistent with the things relevant to that individual. So they would include actions, feelings, ideas, beliefs, and values. The psychological discomfort is triggered by clashing views and beliefs with new information. So, and to be clear, it's not a disease or illness. It's a psychological phenomenon. So you as an individual aren't suffering from something when you experience it. What you're doing is is the bias that you favor that preference, right? Because remember, bias is another way of saying preference, prejudice, right? Opinion. That when those things are challenged, and there's a degree of comfort in the worldview you have, or in how you see yourself, or in your biases, anything that might challenge them suddenly causes you, like, it's psychological discomfort, to be clear. Like, and to a degree, I guess you can experience physiological discomfort as a result of the psychological discomfort. But the point is that you become resistant to any thinking that's contrary to what you believe to be true. Have you ever experienced this in your life, or?
Yeah, I can think of an example that's not exactly mine, but like, say you're hungry, but you're short on cash, you don't want to spend too much money, you need to save, that's a very important thing, but all of a sudden you see there's a special on some food item, it's like fast food.
Okay.
Then there's a little battle between part of you that goes like, I could afford it, really. But...
Okay, I don't know that it's exactly cognitive dissonance. Okay, here I'll try and cite an example that might actually. I remember I had a friend once who strongly believed in not just their opinion, but their faith. So they placed a lot of emphasis on their opinion and faith. And then when you would present contradictory information, their go-to would be, we just agree to disagree. And then I would confront them and say, actually, no, you're wrong. Because the argument that you're making is purely based on what you want and what you think personally, through your biases, but not an accurate reflection of the information. Now this information challenges that. And so instead of going, hey, maybe I need to readjust my own thinking, right, to accommodate this new insight, which is, like, again, based, and I'm talking about stuff an insight that was supported by observable try that again, by evidence and statistical information. So that challenged, those facts challenged something with regards to the opinion, and then their go-to was this form of dismissal, which again is part of the 10 human fallacies, right? Like, where they would immediately go to changing the subject, right? So I think that's it's the red herring, right? That they have 10 logical fallacies. So they would immediately defer to, well, it's just, we agree to disagree. And it's like, that doesn't promote any kind of understanding. All that says is then what I think to be true is true, and then what you think to be true is true. And I'm like, what surprised me was that they didn't see how obvious what appeared to me to be obvious, how much division that created. So you just abstain, you just refuse to acknowledge, like, the observable facts, and then you just kind of dismiss any kind of argument contrary to a long-held opinions and beliefs, for that matter. So you can see then where cognitive dissonance can be quite challenging, particularly when you're presenting information that people actually just don't want to hear, right?
Yeah, like the fact it was faith-based on his part.
Well, and opinion, right? Because the opinion was like, again, their bias, their preference, their prejudice, that they favored those things. And to your point, like, when it's faith-based, they don't require evidence. Well, but I'm going, but if you don't, like, then it's unsupported idea. It's just an idea. It's just what appeals to you as an individual, right? Without any kind of broader considerations for what it might mean for groups of us or all of us, right?
Yeah. Instead of saying, "Oh, I think this way," you could have just said, "I feel this way." And then...
Yeah, this is my personal view, and which would be fair, because again, part of that is their right to be able to think and feel and express their freedom of choice. But this is the argument I would make. Are you really free if you're all your positions are influenced by your preferences, prejudices, bias, and self-interest. Well, then where's the freedom in that? You're exercising the freedom of choice and freedom of thought and freedom of speech, but you're not actually free. You're slave to these very ideas, so that the internal conflict, and that's what cognitive dissonance could be. That it could be seen as that internal conflict where you're struggling and you just don't want to accept, this challenging idea that perhaps that what you're expressing is just more self-interest and more bias and not acting in accordance to freedom, because it's the pretense of freedom. So if we're going to say that you're free, then aren't you? That means that you're free from all your biases, all your prejudices, your own subjectivity. That you're aware of these things, and then what you do is, instead of allowing them to inform actions, behaviors, and thoughts, you just you defer to objectivity, and you go, what are the observable facts? Right, and you're going to adhere to those, and then you draw conclusions based on those things, right? No, that's a bit of a tangent, but it's something that's relevant to what we're talking about. Is there anything you'd like to say with regards to cognitive dissonance?
That makes sense. If you have somebody who's trying to support a claim just because they have prejudice in their own, they set it up in a way where their thinking has to answer a certain way. It can't be exploratory. It has to be this, oh, I'm influenced by certain biases. I have to keep that bias up, so my logic will reflect whatever gets me to there.
Right, to maintain the consistency of their bias, right? Because that's what cognitive dissonance is. And then how many of anyone listening to this, or even though the two of us, that it's something that you've experienced in the course of your life, where you resisted insights that conflicted with your worldview or views you had with regards to yourself in life, right? Like you didn't want to accept the fact that maybe that you were being negative, or you didn't want to acknowledge that behavior, or that you're expressing resentment and stuff, that you thought that no, I'm just being I'm being me, right? Instead of recognizing in your own behavior, that the fact that that there might be some kind of erraticness to your behavior, right? So getting back to cognitive dissonance, so it can be equated to like confirmation bias, right? Where and again, this is what people will do to defend their own biases. It's a tendency to search for and interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms and supports one's prior beliefs and values. This display of bias is selective information that specifically supports their views, ignoring contradictory information. Right, so if you're going to be open-minded, that means that we always finish with question everything. Well, this is where the value of questioning things comes in, and I always emphasize that you need to question yourself. What motivates you, and then out of those motivations, are they of benefit, or are they just benefit to you? So you need to make the distinction. You need to understand that behaviorally, that that you could be acting out of self-interest and again at the expense of someone else. So if you believe that everyone has value, well, if your self-interest it causes a negative effect in someone else, then now it's at the expense of someone else. It's not free of cost. Whereas objectivity, you just go, here, this is just what it is. You accept things for what they are, and you go, what are the facts? What do the facts say? Draw conclusions from those. So anyway, so within confirmation bias, there are some who say that you cannot eliminate the confirmation bias, that our go-to is to do that, to validate their position and confirm that they are in fact like in the right. So I would argue that contrary to that would be then to train in critical objective thinking, where there's greater value, and now because it lends so completely to objectivity. So critical objective thinking allows for you then to be more discerning and to distinguish opinion and bias from facts, and then provide you the ability to look at the facts objectively and then come to conclusions, right? Like, look, it's all problem solving, but the question becomes, how do you solve the problem? You can solve it in the service of your own self-interest, or do you solve the problem and you find a solution that best serves the problem that you're presented with, right? So, which again, something we never talk about, and quite honestly, I think there's a great value in, but the fact that most of us aren't even aware of it says to me how little importance it is, because it promotes ideas of it promotes unity, where subjectivity or self-interest, bias, prejudice, it's divisive. It creates division, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's also really helpful if you want to be a consumer to have that implicit bias. Like, you're going to justify, like, for the example I said earlier, you're going to justify that it's a discount, you have just enough money to buy this thing, you were trying to save, but you really want this fast food burger or whatever they're selling. There's always going to be that internal dialogue telling you, oh no, you can just ignore this. But if you look at, I had a goal, save money, not to enjoy this food, and then all of a sudden you're trying to convince yourself not to do it, that's a good time to reflect and look at okay,
so that,
why do I have these biases, how they come out.
Okay, so it's against even a simple decision like the one that you're citing, it creates internal conflict, right? Because now it's the things you want versus what would be the smartest thing that you can do. Here's another way of approaching problem solving. Anytime you're confronted with anything, so when I say problem, I use it in the broadest sense. So anything that you're confronted with that requires you to make a decision one way or the other, that the first question that you might want to ask yourself is, what's the smartest thing to do versus what you want to do. So you recognize that there's a want that you have, and then there's another course of action that would represent the most intelligent or smartest thing that you could take to this. And then you weigh them out. You go, so where's their greater value? Right? And then you would make a decision. So again, there's no eliminating subjectivity or bias preference. The idea is that you change the nature of your perspective with it, or the relationship you have with it, so that suddenly now those things are not informing your judgment. They just, all it becomes is it demonstrates another avenue or a choice that you could make, right? So then the question is, what will you choose, right? So do you find yourself ever confronted by anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I've heard a bunch of examples of this, but one I really like is where you have a mentality where you treat yourself as if you're your own friend that you're taking care of. You have to realize this person really needs to save money, don't let them do that. Or you could say, Joanne, it's been a hard week, they've been working hard, they should have this little bit of treat just so they're
to stay motivated and stuff, right? Just a little bit. The example that you cite, it's interesting, how you chose to word it. So it's stepping outside yourself.
Yeah,
and then reflect. Yeah, right.
I just found it really.
Well, I'm just saying, and then you're reflecting on you. Well, I mean, schizophrenic as that might sound, it's not. It's got merit. The idea that, like, here you suspend your own personal interest and you come at it in the same way that you would address like a friend. You go like, here, hey, is this really something you want to be doing? You think this is like the right way to address this? Isn't that the kind of conversations that you have when you're confronted with dilemmas with your friend, and then they ask for your advice, and then you try to offer up the most sound advice possible, right? So reasoning, then sound reasoning, then you can associate that with objectivity that exists outside of your biases, your preferences, your opinions, and it might actually contribute to better choices. Again, ultimately, all of this stuff is about how we're going to choose a course of action and how we're going to behave as a result of whatever it is that we're confronted with, and how you're going to address it. So if your behavior's self-interested, self-motivated, reflects your biases, preferences, and prejudices, that you might act in a way that you think is favorable to you, but if things don't meet your level of expectation, then now you've set it up in such a way that psychologically now you create all this potential for anxiety and stress, because somehow it's all meaningful because it's you, and you're deserving, and not to say that you aren't. We're all worthy, but again, an undisciplined view or an undisciplined way of living will lead to lots of personal struggle and conflict, internal conflict. And isn't that the hallmark of like basically society now? Like that, right? Mental health issues are on a steep incline or increase. So I'm going, what do you think might be feeding into that? And is it a way then to perhaps ameliorate the more negative effects of that? So again, I'm not talking about like getting rid of subjectivity or preference or bias or prejudices, that you change the nature of your relationship with them. You recognize them as just being a personal reflection, and that, in the grand scheme of things, there's no real value to them, right? There's only value to you. But and again, then you should gravitate towards those who reflect those, and then that's how you find your tribe, right? Like that, the people that you're going to associate with. But I would dare say that that you can tie all those things, opinion, bias, preferences, prejudices, subjectivity, to your personal suffering. That there's a direct relationship there. Right? So how much do you want to suffer?
With the example I used before, where you have to look at yourself as your own friend.
Right.
If you take care of yourself, it makes sense. When your friend comes to ask, when your friend asks advice, you're going to give them the best solution, because they're not going to have the same...
you think.
Yeah, they're not going to have the same biases as you. You're not going to have this... They're not going to have the same triggers as you. Like, oh, I really want that cookie. So if you look at people that don't do that for themselves, they don't do it for their friends either. Their friends are like, oh, I should have some money in the bank, but I really want to drink. Oh yeah, man, get some beer, come to my place, we'll hang out.
Okay, so there's two ways to advise, to advise when someone comes seeking advice from a friend or an associate. You can offer up an objective kind of perspective, which was what most of us do, because we're not tied. We're not personally tied to it, tied to whatever their conundrum they're faced with. So then we can reflect on it in an objective way. Or you can offer up advice that's entirely in alignment with your biases.
Right, because the person who's saying, oh, buy some drinks and come over.
Yeah, right.
Not only is it in service of themselves, they don't care what it's doing to their friend's wallet or to his health. Right.
So again, like, it should... To me, it seems obvious. So I'm hoping that it seems obvious to everybody, the value then in understanding our subjective worldviews, and how things like confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance feed into that subjectivity, that so that you favor your own subjectivity or preferences, biases, or prejudices. And again, ultimately, there's nothing wrong with that, but it becomes problematic though. And there's not a problem in ever having them, but it becomes a problem when you start treating them as somehow they're paramount, they're more important than someone else's. That you only it only creates room for now external conflict. So now you got internal conflict going on, elements of it because of the way you think and thinking, and now it feeds into external conflicts with the outside world because the way you value your subjectivity clashes with somebody else's values, their subjectivity. So again, it just seems obvious to me that it just feeds into more division, right?
I would say division and also like self-satisfaction through artificial means.
Well, it's not real satisfaction, but you're right. It's self-satisfaction in the sense that like in the very short term, it's gratifying, but it's only because you served your own self-interest, and typically at the expense of somebody else. So the alternative would be then you find a way that you can draw greater satisfaction from things that you objectively love to do. There's greater satisfaction and gratification in pursuing those things you love to pursue for the sake of doing, right? And that ties into I've often brought up like the default mode network, the brain, like that, stimulus independent thought that also feeds into the subjectivity. But the other region of the nervous system that acts kind of counter to the default mode network is the task positive network. So the task positive network predisposes you to the flow state, and we've talked about Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. We did a whole episode on flow state, where now that you can be completely dialed in, completely present, and you gain there's an enormous sense of satisfaction and joy because it all ties to what you love to do. So you seek those things. And when I say the things that you love to do, whatever that you have to define what those are. And as long as they're not at the expense of someone else, you basically have carte blanche. You can chase them to your heart's content, right? Your heart's desire. So agree, disagree, don't care.
Oh, I don't care. I was gonna ask, what's carte blanche? Never heard of it.
It just means that the freedom to actively, like, without an inhibition, it's a French expression, right? I'm fairly sure it's a French expression, and it just means to pursue something without any hindrance or inhibition.
That really does sound like a really enjoyable activity that you're focused on.
Well, it can be anything, like what.
Yeah, there's no inhibition though. Like the chattering, your brain slows down. You're not thinking about whatever's out there.
Right.
You're dead focused.
There's huge benefits to activating the task positive network, and that's you lose all sense of time. You suddenly become more resistant to pain. You're highly energized. So it feeds into all the things that you would like to experience. But having said that, the default mode network, the moment you become distracted in the midst of the task positive thing, you immediately go into the default mode network. That's the way your system works. It takes tenths of a seconds for it to switch, right? But that's when you get either part of the task positive network. Whatever it is that you're actively pursuing has to be challenging enough that it's engaging, but not so challenging that it's overwhelming. So the moment that you become overwhelmed, that's when the default mode network would kick in and start influencing again your subjectivity, your biases, stuff, because it'll start feeding random thoughts. And again, we understand that those are very largely negative, and and they're always self-referential, right? Again, that feeds into, already we established that with subjectivity, bias, preference, and prejudice, that you set yourself up for psychological suffering. So it feeds into that. So here, you can minimize that. You don't have to experience that to the degree that probably most of us do. And again, if you look at legacy media, mainstream statistics, mental health issues are on a steep incline. People are suffering, and here, this isn't potentially represents a way for you to be able to address those things in such a way that you can actually, to a greater or lesser extent, minimize how much you're suffering. There might be value in that, right?
I was gonna say, in the objectivity and subjectivity video, we definitely mentioned how if you're in the subjective state of mind, it's really hard to get out of it. Like, it keeps drawing you back in over and over. Like, say you're working on a piece of wood and you're so focused, you're fine. All of a sudden, something catches your attention. It's not quite right.
It draws you away.
Yeah, anxiety comes in. Oh, am I messing up this, model I'm making?
Right. So you can see where there might be, like, there's a push and pull going on internally within each and every one of us, and for so many of us, we succumb to the more negative aspects of it. And here, I'll give you a great example. So cognitive bias, going back to the example that I illustrated with that friend everything was faith-based and they valued their opinion above all things. That's cognitive bias, and it's the tendency to act in an irrational way due to, like, limited ability to process information objectively. So it's somebody who's steeped in their subjective view. And if they were trained to sort of, like, understand that you can view things in an objective way, and then to learn to critically think, they wouldn't be victim to cognitive bias. And remember, the hallmarks of cognitive bias are irrationality or rationalizations. You offer up any kind of bizarre explanation to explain it away, or to somehow to validate whatever it is that you're thinking, or whatever position that you may have, right? So it's to think of cognitive bias, you have to think of it as kind of like a systemic error. So it starts right from the way you initiate your thinking. It's one error compounded by another error, compounded by more further errors. So and again, it shouldn't surprise anyone. Then it leads to an irrational thinking, which produces irrational behavior. Right? You act erratically. You do things that you go like, what are you thinking? Why would you do that? Like, right? It's a result of, like, not being able to see what's going on around you in an objective way, where you're so embedded in your subjectivity that now you basically, like, you'll do or say anything to your advantage, right? Like, so it's the way that, again, it's the way in which we people, if their failure in their ability to process and interpret information. And that's why objectivity is so important. You want to suspend as much perception and interpretation, which again is something that's a direct result of, like, things like prejudice, bias, preference, opinion. All right, so and it's always, excuse me, and all of that is always tied to your personal memories, because you're always going to draw on the memories to inform all that stuff instead of observable facts. So memory becomes, for cognitive things like confirmation bias, cognitive bias, all those things. It just you use your own experiences and memories as the reference point for what you're doing, instead of seeking perhaps a more objective way of seeing everything. Right?
I felt like you were about to say new understanding.
Well, yeah, maybe even that's true too. Like that would be. I was
going to say, like, all the conditioning that people are brought up on, it makes perfect sense that, Did I just lose it? I had fun.
No. You're 100% spot on when you say the conditioning feeds into subjectivity, right? So, so then a combination of your own personal experiences, your memories, your social conditioning, which is another way of saying socialization or brainwashing, all feeds into these preferences or bias. And you don't like the choice of words. Remember that all those words can be used interchangeably because ultimately they mean, in the broadest sense, mean the same thing.
Right. I was going to say, because of their conditioning, they have prejudice to what's going on in the moment. They're treating it as memory that they've already sort of interacted.
Well, they're drawing from that preconditioned experience from their past.
Yeah.
And then they use that now as a way to interpret or judge and draw conclusions based on what they're currently experiencing.
Right, which seems kind of silly once you think about, like, hey, this is a new experience. It's not the last experience.
Right. So, and again, it's important to acknowledge that because most of us have never thought about how to approach new experiences or things that you're introduced to. Are you going to draw on your past? Don't get me wrong. Like, sometimes borrowing from your past experience can kind of be beneficial. But I would rather you come at a new experience objectively, and then you don't have to worry about where there's potential pitfalls. Because if you're coming at it objectively, you'll actually see them long before you actually succumb to the pitfall, right? But when you base it all on memory, on your previous experiences, you draw on those, then there's a tendency to actually, you ever hear people say, "Why does this always happen to me?" Right? It might be because you're basing everything that you do or the decisions you make or the course of actions that you take on memories instead of observable facts, the present moment, the observation, objectivity, right? So, and then, which is to me, seems like a far better way than to inform any kind of choices or decisions or judgments that you might make, right? So, yeah, I know you got something to say.
Yeah, I have something to add.
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say objectivity definitely would have a better way to orient the direction you're going in. It definitely would change your goals, because if you're going off this preconditioned idea of what's going to happen, you're already coming into the situation with arrogance. If you experience it, you're being objective, you'll see pitfalls, like you say, long in advance.
Right.
That might just be because of the way our brains work during the task engaged network.
Okay, task positive network.
Yeah.
Okay, but I would argue that objectivity gives you the real freedom to make decisions that are not tied to anything. It gives you the capacity for like insights within any given experience that allows for you to navigate the experience in a very successful way. And here's the other thing: objectivity is not a guarantee, right? You can come at everything objectively and with a critical eye and still come up snake eyes, right? So having said that, part of subjectivity is the idea that we want guarantees. We want to know that if we do this, that we're going to get exactly what we expect, right? So it becomes transactional, right? And again, it's all because what we value is security and comfort, right? That we want to be comforted and we want to feel secure. So that, again, that feeds into subjectivity. It allows for, because then you become the focus of everything, right? Like you're the center of it all. And to a degree that's true, but you're not it would be like you're the center of everything, but so is everyone else. But subjectivity only wants you to recognize you as the center, right? So does it make sense what I just said? Is that confusing?
No, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
I was just thinking that would be crazy to see in nature just one animal that's completely oblivious, just thinking about whatever it's.
It would be prey.
Yeah, no, 100%.
It would be the first thing to be eaten. Oh, what's that?
I definitely don't see any biological advantage to just being kind of out of it, thinking about whatever drives you, not passionately,
Okay.
but like.
Okay, that's okay. What we're talking about is a bit of an extreme, right? But in that, if you spend all your time only interested in yourself, and then you never consider anything beyond you, like all your thoughts begin and end with you. It might be fair to say that it'll make you neurotic.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's not like you get security or any real comfort by like thinking about your own.
Well, and protecting your own ass, because the more you do that, the more anxiety you're going to have, because then inevitably the question will be, is this enough? And of course the answer, the default mode network and the random thought generator will tell you, no, you need more. You need more security. You need to be more safe.
It would drive you right to existentialism.
What? No, paranoia. Right? Like, it would make you fucking nutty.
Oh yeah.
Right? So, and again, because it would create like erratic and irrational thinking and behavior. Right? So, can we agree on that? You're cool with that? That's good. Does that work?
I'm going to say yes.
Okay, well, look, what we're really discussing is metacognition, and metacognition is an awareness of one's own thought processes and understanding patterns of our own thinking. So ultimately, what's really valuable then is to be discerning enough to understand that we operate from subjectivity, which is another way of saying expectations, bias, preference, all those words, and in understanding your own thinking processes, you're able to liberate yourself from them, because now you can develop an understanding that this is how I think, this is what I do, and then when you encounter that, when you're dealing with new experiences, you can go, hey, that this isn't required. Right. So what is required? Well, a new way of looking at things. Well, what is the new way? And it's not a new way. It's being objective. So critical objective thinking then leads you to it gives you the capacity then to I guess it's an interpretation, but because it's based on observations or the observable facts. So I would say that in any kind of new experience, a fresh experience, if you're approaching it objectively, then it gives you the ability to have more profound and deeper insights as to what's going on, because you're liberated. You're not struggling with yourself. This is the real freedom, right? Because subjectivity and all that other stuff that it fits under that umbrella. That's a freedom of thought, it's a freedom of choice, it's a freedom of speech, and it allows for you to be in the most reckless way to say virtually anything, think anything, and that you want, or make any kind of choice that you want, good or bad. But if you come at everything objectively, now you're truly free.
It seems like you have the freedom of like genuine decision. You have real attention.
Right, so that you can, because of the attention, you can come to reasonable conclusions and then choose reasonable courses of action, or another way of saying it would be the most appropriate course of action based on the details of the circumstances that you're confronted with, right? And again, this is something that you would, to me personally, I always thought, like, wait, shouldn't everybody be trained to do? Because critical objective thinking you have to be trained for that, right? Because if you just go by what your nervous system and the psychology does, you'll just feed into the subjectivity and the default mode network of your nervous system, and then basically experience nothing but push and pull and suffering for the entirety and the duration of your life. Is that really how you want to live?
Yeah, they call that going through the motions.
Right.
A lifetime that would suck.
Well, I hear experts say all the time, that's just life. I go, no, that's an untrained, undisciplined life. That's what it does, right? But if you're well trained, well educated, and learn to master objectivity and critical thinking, you become liberated from those things. You have real freedom. All that other stuff is the pretense of freedom. Objectivity is the freedom to be able to see things for what they are, without a dog in the fight, without you having any kind of preference. That you go, here, what are the facts, and how do you, and then the whatever insights you gain from the facts, how do you move forward? So to me, it seems, like I said, it's obvious, right? So, but that's just me. Don't believe a damn thing I'm saying. So, anything you'd like to contribute?
I was gonna just say, like, yeah, of course, question everything. Like, when you have a subjective voice pop up, if you're at least practiced enough to realize that voice, that's a voice in my head. It has the dog in the fight. It's not necessarily me. It's my biases, my desires.
Yeah, so that's,
to, like, have a cookie or whatever.
yeah, I think
Just notice it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. That when you say that it's not you, it's not you. That's it's the reactionary part of your nervous system, right? So it wants you to always favor you, right? And I'm like, here, you don't have to be a slave to that, right? So you can be enslaved by your biology, enslaved by your psychology, enslaved by ideas, or you can be liberated from all that stuff. So you have to decide, you as the individual. And no one's ever told you that there was a choice. Well, here, I'm telling you, there's a choice, right? That you can choose to be a slave to everything, or you can choose freedom, real freedom, right? Which you can equate then to being like objective, a critical objective thinker. The observer is the observed, that you suddenly see the paradoxes and you're able to navigate reality in such a way that you minimize how negative your experiences are. It's not that they go away, but now they don't have a profound effect on you, right? And isn't that what all the mental health issues are? People not being able to reconcile things and then suffering psychologically as a result of it.
At least when you have an objective state of mind, you're able to, like, have a more accurate look at what's more painful. For example, since we're having this conversation, I feel like I should be honest and say, I ate too many cookies, I stayed up late last night. In the moment, I knew it was a bad decision, but I went with it. I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I'll get enough sleep. Man, I traded that enjoyment of eating an entire box of cookies by myself and staying up late. But it was in service of the feeling in the moment, and I don't have that experience anymore. Now I'm just tired. I feel like a couch potato. Like, that's the reality.
Okay, so you see the nature, like the cause and effect of like choices that you made, and it's a funny one. And it's funny because every I don't know a personal life who's never done something like that. Oh, I shouldn't eat the whole box.
I'm happy to at least stop to, like, recognize what I was doing, but I was like, I'm gonna let the subjective voice win this time.
But that's okay. Remember, that the internal conflict is you moving from in and out. For most of us, we never leave subjectivity. But for those of us who are aspiring to objectivity, you flow back and forth. It's the ultimate expression of yin and yang, right? So there's action. There's elements of objectivity and subjectivity within each of those subjective views and objective views. And It's the capacity, metacognition, the capacity to recognize this stuff, that you sit there and you recognize your own patterns of thinking, and you're aware of the thoughts that you're having. And so then once you see them for what they are, that they're just thoughts and they're random, and if you wait long enough, they'll be replaced with another. You can be free from them. They're not meaningful. But for most of us, we identify so closely to those thoughts, to our subjective view. We're so wrapped up in that you can't get past yourself. And there's nothing wrong with like caving into your subjectivity when you're hanging up by yourself one night and you got nothing on the plate, you got nothing going on, and you're gonna go, oh, I'm gonna get wrapped up in a movie. Might as well enjoy some like junk food. To me, that's the kind of subjectivity that like you go like that has value. It actually has value. It's like the preference, like, hey, you like, I've cited this before, that you like chocolate ice cream and I like vanilla, and you're like, chocolate's the best. I'm like, no, vanilla's the best. It's fucking irrelevant. It's just ice cream, right? Right? So and there's nothing wrong with you having a preference. The failure, the breakdown, it's the best. That's just ice cream. That's the objective truth. It's just ice cream. No, it's my ice cream, so mine's better than yours. To you. For you. To you. Right? But people do this sort of thing all the time, and they barely recognize that this is going on. And again, it feeds into your suffering. So that's why, like, I don't think there's any shame in you caving into your subjectivity and killing a whole box of cookies while you're watching YouTube videos or a movie or whatever, right? Like, that might be one of the few times where you go like, hey, that's good enough, right? So, having said that, I think I'm going to move on to the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? So I'm just going to read from my notes here, and then we can jump into the conversation. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is when people with limited competence in a particular domain overestimate their abilities, right? Some researchers include the opposite effect for high performers. Their tendency is to underestimate their skills, right? So the Dunning-Kruger effect could be seen as like basically you're overinflating yourself or you're deflating yourself, right? So that's how they characterize it here. It is often misunderstood as a claim about general overconfidence of people with low intelligence instead of specific overconfidence of people unskilled at a particular task. So it's not necessarily a reflection of intelligence. It's a reflection on their skills on a particular type of task. They overestimate their ability in any particular like skill or task that they might be assigned, right? That they go into it gung-ho and stuff, and then partway through they're like, oh my god, I have no idea what I'm doing, or I don't know what this is, or right? So and there are studies that have been run by David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999, and the focus was on logical reasoning, grammar, and social skills, since the other studies have been conducted in fields such as business, politics, medicine, driving, aviation, spatial memory, and examinations of school and examinations of literacy. They're not sure what causes this Dunning-Kruger effect, but it's poor performers misjudge their abilities because they fail to recognize the difference between their performance and their actual abilities. So it's an overestimation or an underestimation of one's own abilities. And then you step into an arena where those abilities are put to a test, and then you essentially break down under the demands of the test, right? So again, how often I can do that. Yeah, no problem.
I was just thinking this draws parallels to the story. Like, you always say you have to at first be ready to be a fool at something before you master it. It makes total sense to me that someone just getting into something they have to go through the skill gap to realize, like, you have to be good enough to figure out you're nowhere close to good.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. That's a great way to say it. So I think, so, you know, it. You can look at the Dunning-Kruger effect as a form of cognitive bias. So remember, it's cognitive bias is that it's you rationalizing in such a way that it produces like an irrational response to an experience, to something that you're confronted with, or processing information, right, and interpreting the information. So so it's the failing of the individual to recognize their own limitations, right? So, and how do you do that? Well, you accumulate experience. You get out and have life, and then you know, as a result of having experiences, then you're sort of able to gauge your ability. And remember, that ability isn't fixed. It's something that can potentially grow or decrease, right? So as a result of like you doing more or doing less in terms of training and stuff, you can become more proficient or less proficient, right? Because all skills, they're perishable. If you're not training, then they get rusty, right? So you're not able to perform at the same level as what you previously were at. And then so that now there's this weird thing. You can see where the Dunning-Kruger effect would kick in right then and there. The overestimation of where they are now, even though maybe at one time they might have had that capacity, but now because they've been complacent, they don't do it, and then now they're expected to perform at that same level of proficiency, and then it falls apart for them, right? Like, so
Yeah, getting rusty is a real thing.
100%. It is. It really is, right? It's okay. Go ahead.
I was gonna interrupt and say, like, it's so real because part of you has to contend with, like, I could do something before and I lost that. It feels like an emotionally attached thing to go, damn, I lost the skill, or at least a degree of.
Okay, so that would be you subjectively interpreting it, and then what would be the objective view of that then?
The objective view is, hey, it's just like a week or two of practice, and then you're de-rusted. You're
okay. So then, and you could take the critical objective thinking one step further. You go, hey, maybe it's more advantageous to not stop practicing.
Yeah.
How much do you need to be able to sustain a level of proficiency? Only you, the individual, can figure that out in the course of practice, right? So, whether that's only a couple times a week, 2 every day, but you have to determine that as an individual. And again, that's what makes the experience a little more interesting, right? The fact that, like, I got it on top of all these other demands of day-to-day living, I got to accommodate and make time to be able to continue to pursue those things that you love to do. What's the first thing most people give up, and they cite it as being having to make a practical choice because they need to, which again I completely understand. Work to live, so you have money, and then what's the first things to fall away are all those things that they love to do, which are the most gratifying and most rewarding, and then now they're just. What are they doing? They're spending all their time trying to distract themselves from the fact that they're not doing these things that they love to do, right? So,
which is a downward spiral.
Excellent. It's exactly what it is, right? So it speaks to managing your time more effectively, so you get adequate rest, you have adequate time to instill, even in a small way, to pursue those things that you love to do, right? It's training the task positive network of the brain. It's engaging it, and it becomes stronger, right? That's what neurogenesis is. Like that, you stimulate that region of the brain, it's going to become better at doing it. So you should favor any kind of activities or any tasks where you draw an immense sense of satisfaction, there's joy, and again, it speaks to the characteristics that we talked about earlier, that like that are part of the flow state, that like now you're less susceptible to pain, you have more energetic, you're engaged, right? Really positive thing. So again, choices. What's life all about? Choices. And we never came into this life with an owner's manual. Or we're like, you buy a brand new car, you get an owner's manual, gives you a complete breakdown how to use it. But coming into the world, we've never had an owner's manual. All we get are conditioning from our social groups or familial groups, the cultural groups, all that stuff, telling you what you are, how to think, or what to think. Sorry, not how to think, what to think. Objectivity is how to think. Subjectivity is what to think. Or yeah, that's right. Right. So then it behooves us as individuals then to create your own owner's manual. And it's, again, it speaks to the idea that like we're custom models. Each and every human is like, it's like getting a car off a factory, out of the factory, and they're all exactly the same as the other one. And then you over the course of time, you start adding things to it and doing things to it that exemplify you more specifically. Well, each and every one of us come into the world as a model like that, and then here's the reverse. It's the reverse. Here's the rub, and then we're forced to be exactly like each other instead of being what you are, which is something, a custom model, something unique unto itself. But you're not more unique than everyone else. It's just that uniqueness is this consistent trait amongst all of us, and that you can treat with value. So I'm like, I sit here and sometimes I shake my head in disbelief. I go, all the ills of the world are a direct result of our failing to understand metacognition, how we think, and looking at our own thoughts, and what are the differences in terms of the way that we view reality versus what reality might actually be versus what we think it is, right? Because that's ultimately what we're talking about. So it's about favoring the potential that exists in you, and then deciding to do something to realize it in its entirety. And it's rooted in first figuring out how you think, and then changing the nature of your relationships to the thoughts that you're having, the methods that you think. And then remember, you're not throwing a baby out with the bathwater. The subjectivity and objectivity, they can be part of the experience. We're predisposed to being subjective because we come into the world like that. Objectivity is a capacity, that quality that you have to train within the individual, right? But so it exists in them, but it has to be drawn out. So again, it speaks to the value of learning and training, good learning, right? So that you can create your own owner's manual.
I think subjectivity definitely helps people neglect themselves. If you think about not personal identity, sorry, I was going to say that. When you think about someone's uniqueness, you kind of lose it once they're in the downward spiral, because that downward spiral looks more or less the same for everybody. But if they're able to become objective, they start finding themselves and they start bringing that to the forefront. That's when you actually get to be unique.
It's not that I disagree, because my view is that we all come into the world being unique, but then much to your point, but then that uniqueness, you can refine it. It speaks to then you becoming even more unique. So then again, you're constant. I'll use art, that you're a piece of art that's in a constant state of a work in progress. That it's constantly being worked on, because it's never exactly what it should be. So it's always evolving. It always requires more further refinement.
Right. Yeah. Through objectivity, the tempering process, becomes more efficient, I guess.
Well, you can characterize it however you want, but I think again, objectivity allows you the freedom. That remember, that's what it means. Being objective means that like you're free of your biases. So then now you look at it's the capacity to take an honest look at yourself without being befuddled by all this shit that you think's really you. It's no longer impeding your ability to see you, and then you see yourself for what you are, and then so that means recognizing your own potentials, and then having an awareness of your own passions and your own aptitudes, and then we're the passions, aptitudes, and overlap. That's where you're going to find the realization of whatever potential exists in you, right? So I think that a life spent in the pursuit of that is far more personally valuable than the agreed upon average way of living a life that typically most people in North America and even the world, in the way that what they consider defined as normal, because you're still normal. I'd rather be weird as fuck.
Yeah.
I'd rather actively create my own culture, create my own reality based on objectivity. What are the objective facts, right? So here's the objective fact that you are an untapped natural resource of unlimited potential. Like, what more greater purpose could there be than to realize that? And how do you do that? Again, through self-mastery. Self-mastery becomes the goal, right?
I wanted to add, I've heard so many times diversity is key, and it really is. People at their top performance, like, it's a very diverse field of minds. But if you think about subjectivity, you're not inclusive, you're not very diverse. Because if you're thinking about it,
it's single-minded.
Yeah, you're curtailing yourself at every single.
That's right.
You can.
Because it has to meet all your expectations, biases, prejudices, opinions. Have to end up reflecting that. So most people trapped in subjectivity become contradictory in and of themselves. They're hypocrites. They say one thing and do another, right? Like
they wouldn't allow themselves to become diverse, and they wouldn't allow themselves to become inclusive if they're subjective.
Right. So then they're always alone. And what do you consistently hear about from people who are suffering mental health? I feel like I'm by myself. I'm in a room full of people, and I still feel alone.
That sounds like such a teenager line.
Well, but what if that's what they really feel? Well, it might be as a result of them being trapped in their subjectivity and without being able to be free from that.
It might be a sign of demotivation, at least for teenagers. Well, any age that gets it. Let's say.
Well, but if they were here, okay, so you're talking about the contemporary teenager, or as a result of your memory from your experience, because being a teenager for you was only a handful of years ago.
Right.
So, based on that experience, under the current way that you're educated, it's what has fed into all this stuff that teenagers experience. Well, if you change the methodology of training, where the focus was then for them to teach them metacognition, to teach them the differences between subjectivity and objectivity, how to implement them, how to draw out those skills, you think that they would continue to go on like, I feel all alone, I'm by myself, there's nobody loves me. Do you think any of that would even enter any kind of conversation? If the focus to the way that they were trained or educated was on, like I said, learning metacognition, how they think and understanding their own patterns of thinking, and then understanding the difference between subjectivity and objectivity, right? That you think maybe they might just be able to liberate themselves from that kind of angst that they experience.
I definitely see how conformity, especially in the social environment you're in high school, conformity is one of the top kind of goals you'll have. Also being unique, which sounds kind of contradictory, but at the same time, they love a class clown in high school,
Sure.
but they'll never promote that class clown to find themselves, join
Because
sports.
well,
teams.
because they typically don't adhere to the norms. What they
Yep.
want is they want someone who's who's a conformist.
The nonconformist types, in my opinion, seem to be at least socially being pushed more and more into like,
The fringes.
yeah, like I don't want to talk about niche internet meme culture.
Well,
But
we
that's
don't have to, but but you can touch on that. Sure, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's what it is for a lot of these younger kind of nonconformist teenagers. Like they don't feel like they fit, and instead of trying to find ways to fit and to discover themselves, they instead conform to a nonconformist lifestyle, which sounds weird.
No, it's a contradiction of terms, but again, it reflects reality,
Yeah.
and that reality is paradoxical, and most truths are paradoxes.
Yeah.
It's not one or the other. It's typically it's a combination of both polar opposites.
Right. So these non-conforming people, like they might eventually grow up and find this identity where they're right between like a scientist and an artist and a fighter. Like,
Sure.
they'll find that they're your unique way of living, but for social media to be so prevalent nowadays, I feel like these people are just finding ways to further and further divide themselves and then use that as a popularity. Like,
Okay, so then
oh, look how unique I am. You
Okay.
can't cage me.
Okay, so then maybe then the fact that we're doing this for social media or like our streaming platform or whatever, we're a champion of a lost cause. We're trying to go here. We're going to use this format to try and let people know that hey, you don't have to be trapped by what you think you are. That you can elevate yourself to in a way, in a capacity that you can't even begin to imagine now, right? But you're trapped. You're all trapped. And here, perhaps maybe this could be the way to, release yourself from the trap, right? So that's why to a degree, it's why we do this. It's the preservation of information. It's sharing the insights, whether you agree with them or don't agree with them. Or ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't care, right? All I'm doing is I'm expressing them in a way so that I hope that even if it benefits a single person, then it was worth all the effort, right? I can already speak to how worthwhile it is because I benefited from it, right? This is my journey. So all I'm doing is expressing my experience and coming to these conclusions, right? And it was a 20+ year journey, longer, So because it really started probably in the early 90s for me, right? We're struggling to try and make sense of everything. Again, I completely relate. I know what it's like to have such internal conflict, and then you can't reconcile it with the external conflict that's going on, and it driving you freaking nuts, right? So all this is the reason that we cover all this stuff is to let anyone who's suffering know you're the answer to all your problems, because you're the source of all your problems. It's not outside of you.
That sounds very uplifting and also very mean. Hey man, you're all your own problems.
Well, because where do you think the source?
No, but you're right. In my opinion.
Yeah, I mean the source of all your issues are from all the external conditioning. But no matter how much external conditioning you've been exposed to, it's still up to you to either do something about it or not to. So, and choosing not to, then you suffer as a result of that. And then here, I'll offer you something, and I'll offer you a lifeline. Here's a life preserver. You can save your own fucking ass. You don't need salvation. That's the worst freaking thing that was ever sold to people. That somehow you could be, that you just waited out long enough and somebody will come along and save you. Screw that. Save your own ass. You can do it.
I forget who told me this, but they didn't say it to me. They gave this to me as a tool to use. You say this, you don't say this. You think about this when you're upset. I'm not going to allow you to make me upset. That's the frame of mind I like approaching it from.
Which, and that completely is in line with objectivity, right? So, what's objectivity really about? It's about empirical evidence and statistics. It's stuff that you can cite to support your position, right? And it becomes entirely reasonable and rational thinking, not a rationalization. You need to understand the distinction between a rationalization and being rational. Being rational is the capacity to act in a discerning way where you exercise logic and reason to come to conclusions. Rationalizations are you creating justifications for what you do. Cognitive bias, right? Because here's the weird thing about cognitive bias. It leads to perceptual distortion and inaccurate judgments and illogical interpretations and irrationality. And we talked about this already, that it feeds into the reactionary, erratic kind of behaviors that people unbalanced tend to do. When it's because it becomes a display of these deeply rooted values on issues that are emotionally charged. Because here's the thing, emotional, because we haven't really discussed emotional content, but subjectivity and objectivity and objectivity doesn't ignore your emotions, it discounts them. That this is not about what you feel. Subjectivity, opinion, preference, bias, faith, all that stuff requires you to be emotionally charged. They're almost always emotionally charged, right? So it's the emotions then further feeding into all that stress and anxiety, and talk about being on the shitty end of the stick, right? So all these things potentially can be working against you. That's why self-mastery becomes the goal. Because then what you're required to do then is to those aspects of what you are, because they're not going away, that you learn to become master of all those things. So much like all the other biases or expectations, there are emotional biases, and they stem from the impulse or intuition or tend to result from reasoning influenced by feelings and memories, right? They're cognitive errors, but they can be easily corrected if you especially if you're emotionally predisposed to reacting, by being objective. So it's not a way to neutralize the emotion. It's a way to curtail it in such a way that you experience it in a small way. So it's not influencing your judgment. But again, you have to train to that end, so that particularly if you're somebody who's you've matured into adulthood and you're reactionary, like that you respond emotionally to something first, and then you have to kind of decondition yourself, talk yourself down. Well, entirely, it's because subjectivity's rule is who's in charge, and then all the emotions you experience can feed into that, and again further entrenching you into an emotional cognitive bias. So it's a combination of what you feel and what you think, and it all reflects your own self-interest. When you see emotions as for what they are, they're an inducement to act, but they're always self-interested. So then again, you allow yourself the opportunity to have the experience of the emotion, whichever it may be, and then recognize that it's temporary, it'll pass, and not to get hung up on it, And you get hung up on it because of your bias, because that somehow that it feels valuable. It feels as though like that it's important. It's just a feeling. But if you spent your whole life going, here, my feelings are important, they're not important. They'll mislead you. Very often, that's what they'll do, right? So again, it's more advantageous than to master your emotions. And I'm not talking about suppression and stuff, where you give yourself the opportunity to feel something, but it should only last for a moment. You shouldn't spend an afternoon agonizing emotionally over something that 5 minutes would suffice. Right?
I can't help but to mention my one friend who gets anxiety from moths.
From what?
Moths.
Oh God, yeah, insects.
No. Moths and butterflies. Just those.
Just moths and butters. So spiders don't do it for them.
Nope. No, like if you think about that, like you're having anxiety response to a small creature, you could just go, and they're out of the way. Like that's one place where it would be very beneficial for my friend to at least like address like. I could absolutely destroy this thing.
I not to get too hung up on it, because I think it's interesting, but it might speak to, remember what we were saying about earlier, how like you draw from memories.
Right.
So it might be drawn from some kind of past experience that was like a child experience where they suddenly became overwhelmed, right, for whatever the details were, and then they weren't able to let go of that, of how emotionally charged that experience became, and then it now has followed them into adulthood, and without being able to resolve it, right? But then again, it's because if it's emotionally based, then it does tend to feed into subjectivity, prejudice, bias, preference, opinion, and the default mode network of the brain, right? Because your emotions do influence the random thought generator. So all these things are tied together. They're not mutually exclusive. So they operate, and because they operate together, then hence the need to master them so that you're not a slave to them. You're not a victim to your own thinking and feeling. Agree? Disagree? Don't care?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And you're right. He did have some trauma related to it.
Okay. So to me, I mean, again, when it's something emotionally charged, it's almost always tied to some kind of memory or past experience that they've never been able to adequately resolve, right? And that's, I'm not an expert, but that's base psychology, right? Like,
right.
So again, don't believe me, I don't know nothing, right? So effects of emotional bias are exactly similar to cognitive biases, because it's just another bias. It's just another thing to filter everything that you experience. So the answer then to emotional biases is emotional maturity, right? Okay, what do I mean? It's about having self-control to manage your emotions. It's you working to understand them, and don't view your emotions and not to treat them as the weakness, right? That you value them, and you don't try to hide from them. That you go, this is what I mean about you give them their moment. You let them have their moment. You go, it's part of what of our makeup. It's part of what we are, right? Being human, emotions are a considerable part of what can drive us. It's an enormous inducement to act, but typically it's an inducement to react, because you're gonna right. So again, that's why objectivity becomes the foil to that, because it gives you the moment to pause. So right, that's emotional, like self-control, to manage your feelings, and now choose an appropriate course of action that reflects objectivity and critical thinking, as opposed to a knee-jerk response that's fueled by like intense emotion, right? So there are 4 states of emotional maturity. So There's survival, which is a fear-based living, security, which is a duty-based living, and success, which is an ego-based living, and serenity, a love, trust-based living. With emotional maturity, one can admit when they need help or are burning out. So emotional maturity allows for you to recognize like that the feelings that you're having, and then to see them how detrimental they might actually be, and beyond your scope of ability to address. And so then you'd seek help outside yourself, where there's no shame in that, right? That's kind of the point. Sometimes, especially for most of us, we have all these unresolved issues that are tied to our feelings from our youth and teenage years, and they follow us into adulthood. And for some people, they never experience any resolution. Well, you would think then you would try to like address these things. So these emotional states of maturation, we start like probably survival emotions. They're probably the most basic and based emotions, right? And it's what drives you to want to act in your own best interest. And then security, to again, that's it's not about you having personal security, but it's more about you being duty bound and honoring like the things that you're going to commit to. So emotionally, you find you go here. I'm going to honor these because it's a benefit, and so it can be a positive emotional experience. And then success. Anytime that you have any level of achievement, the emotional response is like high state of elevation. You've some euphoria, enthusiasm. So, but the one that's probably the most potent is serenity, which is love. And what is love? Again, it's I promise we're going to cover actually love, and it'll be its own entire episode. But suffice it to say that love, that it can be the ultimate healer. It's multifaceted, right? Because a lot of there's a lot of chemistry between people, and romance gets confused for love. But I'm talking about love in the most balanced sense, and what I mean by that is that it's about acceptance, and acceptance not of just of others, but acceptance of yourself, and it's acknowledgement of your own worth, because you feel love for yourself. You don't, and that in a state like that, then do you really need to be loved by somebody else? No, because if you experience love, then why do you need love from another person? You're whole and complete unto yourself. So then if you get involved with somebody and they feel and they reflect on love in the same way, then you're two whole people coming together. Then maybe that it would speak then to the level of potential success in a relationship. It's based on like emotional maturity, and you have true love for each other, as opposed to what we do now, where basically marriages and love and all that are transactional. All right?
Yeah, it's in order to complete themselves. They have to bring someone else in the situation. You know what's funny? When you're a kid, you assume, oh yeah, no, people, they love each other, that's why they're together. It's like, no, a lot of people are trying to fix their own shit.
Right, and so then, and it speaks to then why there's such a why so many marriages fail, and then makes you wonder then, of the marriages that people are together, are they really together because they truly love each other, or is it just a thing of convenience? And probably a larger percentage of the marriages that are considered a success, they're probably just situations of convenience, right? They tolerate each other. I'm going, is that really what you want? Really, in terms of, right? So, with emotional maturity, one can admit, like, here's the other thing. When you love yourself, then you have the ability to be honest with yourself about your own shortcomings and your own failures as a person, or areas that you need to focus on, because you care enough about. And again, it's compassion. You have compassion for yourself that you go, here, this is something I can't ignore. I need to take care of this. There's something I have to find a way to manage this, to take care of this, to do this. Yes?
Yeah, that's like setting boundaries in relationships. It's a lot more beneficial to do that and go through the process of working that out with your partner instead of just going, hey, I'll do whatever you want, but in 3 years I'm going to be resentful. In 2 years we're going to stop going out on dates.
So and so can you imagine then? Now you have two people coupling. They're both rooted in their subjectivity. What kind of a relationship that they might have?
They're slowly pulling hairs from each other, just trying to get
I think that you would see a lot of external conflict. That they would be very conflicted. So it's, again, if you're going to have any measure of real success in terms of the way that you relate to other people, that objectivity and critical objective thinking would probably better serve your relationships, right? That, again, it would allow, because and then you look at each other differently, and you go, here, I'm here to help you, I'm here to love you, right? So then you're operating from an emotionally secure place, that you can actually now be able to move forward and address things that you've neglected, right? So again, it's so tricky, right? Like, so tied to so much of it ties to like subjectivity and preferences and opinions and biases and prejudices. All that stuff feeds into the nature of like any kind of interaction between people, never mind a loving couples relationship. That we're, again, if you're experiencing any kind of internal conflict, it's going to manifest externally too, within the nature of your relationships. So it speaks then, again, another reason why mastering the self becomes so important. Master of self, right? Like, you can treat it however you want. Believe me, disbelieve me, don't care. But if you're going to approach things, then wouldn't you be better served than by recognizing the limitations of subjectivity and emotions and the biases that they feed into, and then the benefit of objectivity and critical thinking and observations and facts, right? Fact-based arguments, right? Those are the things that you should be seeking, because it's stuff, at least that's information. And then if it's facts, that you can kind of vet out the facts, you can validate whether or not there's any truth to them. But when it's just a faith or an opinion or an expectation, it's just bias, right? So I would rather go that. To me, I would rather lean that way. Any thoughts, feelings?
I want to find a way to summarize a couple of thoughts, but I don't think I have it on hand.
That's okay. That's good. It's good. I can keep talking. Can I get a time check?
Yep. 1 hour, 33 minutes in.
You know what? You might want to dig up those thoughts. I think for this topic, I think we served it well enough that I think we could probably bring this to a close.
Yeah, be aware and question everything. I feel like that's pretty accurate when it comes to your own personal view, the way you react with others. There's critical ways to go about the way you behave.
Right. So again, it speaks to the idea of, like, let's quickly summarize. So metacognition, right? You having the capacity to recognize patterns in your thinking and see and recognizing the thoughts that you're having, right? critically important, and it'll that having that capacity or taking the time to pay attention to those things then really does feed into you being objective, and because you're going to have to bring a critical eye to it. So again, it services you being liberated from the thinking, right? In that, and what do I mean by that? That random thought generator, it's just going to constantly spit out those thoughts. So it gives you the capacity to not treat them with some kind of implied value that somehow they're meaningful or valuable, right? And it's not that subjectivity is the enemy. You're biologically predisposed to it. It's how you experience reality. You experience it through the uniqueness of yourself. Having said that, it's not the only way to experience it. And there's no failure in you having faith, opinions, prejudices, preferences. Nothing wrong with any of that stuff. The failure is when you start thinking that that stuff is more important than somebody else's, right? So again, to be clear, you're better served by self-mastery through critical objective thinking. I'd just like to close by saying, question everything, including yourself, especially yourself. Seek balance, seek knowledge, seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical objective thinker. Thank you for your time. Have a great night.